Welcome back, Year 10s, to your first lesson on looking at Whitechapel. And we're going to be looking at essentially the background behind the Ripper murders. We're going to be looking at essentially how and why they could have happened. We're looking at, this is your big case study, your criminal case study on Whitechapel, 1880s Whitechapel, okay? It's an important part of your examination. So today's lesson then, by the end of the session, okay, everybody should be able to describe what it was like to live in Whitechapel in 1888. Most people should be able to evaluate the impact of population and geography. Some of you might be able to analyse how conditions made crime more likely. Okay. Start a task for you then. So in the late 19th century, so we're talking about sort of late 19th century, early 20th century, the 1880s, Whitechapel in the East End of London was one of the capital's poorest districts, with gangs ruling its streets. Out of a population of 30,000, maybe 1,000, long-established Londoners shared the district with more recent Irish and Jewish Eastern immigrants, Eastern European immigrants, and the difficult lives of inhabitants contributed to the high levels of crime. So take a this is a couple of questions I want you to pause. This is your starter task. Take about 5 or 6 minutes to describe your initial description of Whitechapel in the 1880s, and then think back to your unit on the American West. So the unit on the American West we studied was essentially round about this time. It was round about 1880s in America. So think back to why people did it. Yeah, it was hard to imagine why people would leave their lives behind to try and move on to the life in the Great Plains. So imagine this is what life in Europe was like at this time. Yeah. Answer this question here. Why did people risk life out on the open plains? Okay, pause for 5, come back when you're ready. So Whitechapel is in the East End of London, 1888. London in 1888 was divided, just like today, the West and the East. So the West End of London is today the wealthiest area of London. Okay, and the East End has always traditionally been the poorer part of London. Okay, so Jack the Ripper, he operated in the East End for a variety of different reasons. So we've got here, okay, so obviously that's where London is. Hopefully you know where London is, okay? So if this is essentially the West End of London here, this is the East End this side, and there is Whitechapel in the middle. Okay, so there's the City of London. This is Whitechapel, based in and around Whitechapel Street and Road, with a few key here. And we've got the locations of where the Ripper victims were found. So here is another, essentially, if you can imagine. So we've got, going back to here, we've got Galston and Commercial Street and Whitechapel Street. So we've got Whitechapel here, okay, and we've got Commercial and Galston. So here, there we go, Commercial Road there on that map. Okay, so with the kind of the boundary of Whitechapel being here. Okay, so you've got Cutfields Yards, George Yard Buildings, Hanbury Street, Bucks Row, Miller's Court, Galston Street. So the streets are coloured according to conditions. So the black area are lower class vicious semi-criminals. These are your vicious semi-criminals, right? The red lining the streets, as you can see, are the middle class as well to do. Okay. So think of where things are. Combination of colours indicate the street's fair proportion of each class is represented by the consecutive colours. So, you know, the black and the blue, lower class, vicious semi-criminals. So, first task I need you to do, okay, is this table here. So, there we go. There's the pages in your book you'll find useful. I need you to have a copy of this particular table in your books. Okay, the pages themselves, they're quite useful, so make sure you've got those in, because then you can refer back to them during the course of this this unit. So pause the video, 5 or 10 minutes, come back when you've completed this task. So what was it about Whitechapel that made it particularly susceptible to crime? Yeah, well, it's 3 things: pollution, housing, and work and social life. This really here, and work, probably more so than social was the work. It was the actual work done by people, or the lack of work, that made it particularly useful for crime, or particularly susceptible to crime. So pollution at that time, yeah, this is the height of the Industrial Revolution. Think back to your study on Industrial Revolution back in year 8. This is the height of the smog, where the principal fuel used to heat houses and also for making stuff with was, okay, coal. Leave that in there. Coal. You burned coal in your house to warm your house. Okay. You used coal to burn fires and furnaces in factories and cities. And this produced the smoke from the actual, from the coal, combined with fog, produced smog, okay, or pea soupers, because it had a greenish color like pea soup and was thick like pea soup, okay? And the smog hung heavily over the industrial city of London, continuously and constantly, particularly bad in summer. It was not possible to see your own hand in front of your face, okay? It was that thick and it was that bad. So we've got a keyword here: sanitation, conditions associated with public health, such as running water and sewerage. Make sure you've written that down. So we've got here, so this is an artistic depiction. So you've got here, these are the terrace houses in London, okay, and each had an outhouse. That's the toilet. Each had an outhouse, and each had a tiny little yard behind it. And then you've got backing on, that's the other terrace, and that's their outhouses, okay, backing onto their yard as well. So that's how tightly packed the housing in London was at the time. Now, where do you think all the poop and wee is going? Because at the time, okay, there were some sewers, but not many sewers, okay? Not many sewers at all. A lot of it just dropped into the local water system, the same water. Okay, and they didn't have taps, obviously, in their houses. Yeah, they would have a water pump that pumped water up from the water table, yeah, or a local well. And this literally just dropped it into the local water system. Yeah, so you can well imagine how quickly disease is going to spread, how poor hygiene and sanitation is. The houses were always near railways. Why? Because it was the principal form of transport. So if you needed to get somewhere, you needed to live near a railway. Of course, trains at that time also used coal. Terrace houses used coal to heat their houses, okay, and this would rise up in the atmosphere and land back down. So in the poorer areas of Whitechapel, the housing was particularly bad. No sanitation, no toilets, no sewage, okay, and literally the poo and the wee flowed liberally throughout the streets, okay, and very few street lamps in the poor areas, yeah. Even the street lamps would have used coal or gas to burn. There was no electricity at the time. The streets were maze-like, so they were dark, dingy, damp, covered with poo and wee and rubbish, okay, and maze-like and tight and overcrowded, the perfect conditions for a murderer to lurk. The majority of housing was in overcrowded slum areas. Slum, that's a key word there, okay? If you don't know what that word slum means, go away and look it up, okay? So they're also known as rookeries, another key word, okay? If you don't know what it is, look it up. They were characterized by dirt, disease, and crime. Houses were divided into several apartments that could, per apartment, house up to 30 people sharing beds. In 1887, one rookery contained 123 rooms, accommodation for 753 people. Families hovered on the brink of starvation. 1881 census, there was about 30,000 people living in Whitechapel, but only 4,000 houses. Accommodation was also offered in lodging houses that offered little more than a bed, right? Some lodging houses had 3 8-hour sleeping shifts. Okay. The smell and the heat in summer, coupled with the presence of rats, the smell and heat in summer made the accommodation truly awful. Is estimated as over 200 lodges. So this is how it worked, a lodging house. Okay, you got kicked out of your lodging house, okay, at the end of your sleeping shift, right? Okay, and you didn't have a job to go to. You went to try and find work for the day and make enough money for 2 things. 1, to get drunk, and 2, to pay for your lodging for the night, okay? And that was your daily existence. Sleep in your lodge, wake up, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to go back to the same lodging house. You might have to go, somebody else might have your room by the end of your day's work and drinking, all right? So you might be living in a different lodge every night. But your job is to make enough money that day to pay for a lodge for the night and get drunk, okay? All right, and so sometimes they would pack people into lodges and there wouldn't be enough beds. So what they would do is they would string a rope from one end of the room to the other, and people would put their arms over the top of the rope and hang off the rope and sleep, okay? That's how truly abysmal it was. Yeah, another, yeah, good image. Think of these tight alleyways, no lighting, no sanitation, no street lights, okay? All right, houses so tightly packed, anybody could be lurking in these little holes, ready to pounce on you. Yeah. So obviously, and we can see the sewage flowing freely through the gutter of the street. This area is quite nice because this one's got a gas lamp in it. Okay, pause the video here, answer these questions. Come back when you're ready. So work, social life and work was a big issue. Yeah. So at that time in the 1800s, there were no jobs for women. Women didn't get jobs. If you were a man, you might be lucky enough, yeah, to leave your lodging and then go and find a temporary day's work in a local factory or a pub, or normally head to the docks, head to the river and help offload stuff. And you'd get paid just enough money for maybe a piece of bread to get drunk and pay for your lodging. But we're talking about a time here in the 1800s where sexism was rife. There was no work available for women. Women were expected to stay at home, okay, and didn't get jobs. But what could you do if you're a woman? You would become a prostitute. Whitechapel's most famous factory was the Bell Foundry, where Big Ben was made. Many residents worked in the sweated trades, tailoring, shoemaking, making matches, okay. Others worked in railway prostitution as labourers. Not everyone found work, okay. You didn't always find work that day. Right, pause the video, answer these questions here. Come back when you're ready. So I mentioned prostitution for women. There were probably over 90,000 prostitutes in London at that time. There were women who couldn't just go to a factory and get a job, or a farm, or couldn't go work on the docks. Yeah. So, you know, it was either that or starve and have no way of paying for your lodging for the night, or worse still, no way of paying to get drunk every night. So you'd be literally forced to have to be sober enough to deal with sleeping rough on the streets or hanging off a rope to sleep that night. So their daily escape was drink, particularly gin. Yeah. And nearly everybody was an alcoholic. Whitechapel had a large amount of pubs and inns to profit from the poverty and the depression of the people. The progress of women's pleasure. So we can, this chart, this is taken from a book, a sort of Jane Austen book. Yeah. And slowly but surely charts the progress of a woman from starting young in life to life living rough on the street as of a prostitute. Okay. And all the various stages. This is taken from this website, Jane Austen's World. Okay. London was a notorious hotbed for prostitutes, probably 1 in 5 women. Okay. 50,000, 90,000, we don't know. We've no idea. Many of them worked alone, plying their trade on the streets, in their own rooms, or in brothels. Okay. And these were essentially the women that Jack the Ripper preyed on, because they were the most vulnerable members of society. No one cared about them. Yeah. They had the roughest, hardest, toughest times, and they were the easiest to attack because there were so many of them. And if one died, nobody cared. That's the tragic and sad. Okay. So have a look at this particular web page and answer this question here. Pause the video, come back. So workhouses, again, think back to your year 8 studies, okay? So they were run by poor law administrators, and essentially they offered food and shelter. Those people, particularly families, yeah? If you were a single man or a single woman, there was an opportunity for you to do something. So as a man, you might have gone and done a day's work in a brewery or a tannery or offloading stuff onto a ship. If you are a young single woman, you could be a prostitute. But if you were elderly, sick, disabled, if you were a young orphan, or if you're an unmarried mother, okay, and let's face it, if you're a prostitute, it's probably highly likely that before you know it, you'll become an unmarried mother. These were the places where you went to for refuge, right? Conditions were deliberately made more horrific, okay? And this was to put people off from going to the workhouse. It was meant to be a last resort. You had nowhere else to go. Tough manual labor, wearing a uniform, families split up. So if you were a husband and a wife with children, you would all be split up and very rarely see each other. Okay, you could be punished for even talking to each other. If you're homeless, okay, you are held separately from long-term residents. Homeless people were seen to be lazy and a bad influence. Key term there, make sure you've written that down. So we've got a photograph taken just after the period we're looking at. So we're only talking about 20 years later, okay? And it's a recent refurbishment of a Whitechapel workhouse, and it shows a line of men waiting for admission into the tramps ward, yeah, for homeless people, all right? Now the source here, a typical workhouse floor plan. It's South Grove Workhouse in Whitechapel, based on this floor plan, so it's fairly typical. You've got the men, you've got the women, the men, the girls, and the boys. So you can see, yeah, how essentially people are split up into four, yeah? Women separate from men, and the two children's sexes separate as well, with separate dining facilities, separate laundry facilities, everything's separate, everything's completely cut off from each other. Got a task for you here, source work. This particular unit is very source work heavy. Your exam, there's going to be lots of evaluating sources here. So look at these two sources. Yeah, you might need to go back in the video and have another look at them. Answer this question. How useful is each source for an inquiry into the treatment of poverty at the beginning of the 20th century? Got a challenge task for you here. So if you are looking to really push right up to the higher grades, if you're looking for grade 6, 7, or an 8, okay, you're looking for a higher grade in your exam, I expect you to have a go at this task, a diary entry, yeah, including talking about housing, sanitation, the kind of people, diseases, and health and crime, okay. Final task, in summary then. Conditions in Whitechapel, okay? Poor housing, overcrowding, unemployment, and attempts to improve conditions, including building new houses and providing orphanages. Okay, these solutions existed alongside more traditional responses to poverty, such as the workhouse system. And as usual, we've got strengthen and challenge tasks, ladies and gents. Okay, this is the end of the lesson 2. So please make sure you complete these tasks once you have finished. Thank you very much, everybody.